on the issues shaping the news. So this is where we break down the biggest and complex stories with the sharpest minds, real conversations with domain experts on the topics which make headlines, even as we speak now. I am Manas Srivastava. So this is a Explain Live event, which is live on YouTube channel of the Indian Express, which will be also recorded and you can watch later. What is the issue for today? Today's Explain Live revolves around, a big issue in a Himalayan nation, and that is Nepal. We're going to talk about turmoil in Nepal and what does it mean. Now, there was a chaos and turmoil in streets of Nepal. We saw it through the protest, the Gen Z protest, which led to collapse of the KP Sharma Oli-led Nepal government earlier this month and leading to an interim government led by former Chief Justice Sushila Karki. Now, the situation was complex and there were many questions that will come in your mind that how did this Gen Z protest begin? What did happen there? What is the background? What are the consequences? The impact on Nepal in the country Nepal and the impact on we have it in our country, India. Now, to answer these questions and more insights, we have in this edition of Explain Live, our guest, Ranjit Rae, who is former Indian ambassador to Nepal. Ranjit Rae was Indian ambassador to Nepal from 2014 to 2017. He was also Joint Secretary North, dealing with India's relation with Nepal from 2002 to 2006. He's also the author of Kathmandu Dilemma, Resetting India-Nepal Ties. He will be in conversation with Shubhajit Roy, diplomatic editor at the Indian Express. Now, before we begin the conversation, here are a few pointers on how we are going to do this for all those who have joined us now. So first, there will be a conversation between our guest and Shubhajit Roy, followed by Q&A. So in case your questions are already answered in the conversation, we might skip, but we'll take up your questions too. So you have to, stick with us to the end. Now, it's over to you, Shubhajit, for this discussion. Let's understand what happens and what will happen in Nepal.
Thank you. Thank you, Manas, for this generous introduction. And I would second every word of that you said about Ambassador Ranjit Rae. Having known him for almost 2 decades, I've had the privilege of interacting with him through many of his diplomatic journey. But today he's had a very illustrious career over 3 decades. But I just want to highlight some of his experiences just to give our audience, our viewer, a sense of his depth of understanding. Firstly, he was when we come to Nepal, he served from 2002 to 2006, as you mentioned. This was the time of the Maoist insurgency, the royal coup by King Gyanendra in February 2005, and the 12-point agreement between Maoists and political parties in Delhi in November 2005. So these are the landmark sort of events or events in Nepal's journey towards democracy that Ambassador Ranjit Rae sort of dealt with as India's Joint Secretary dealing with Nepal. Apart from that, he has had few more interesting postings. Apart from his, obviously, ambassadorships are always important, which is what he did from 2014 to 2017, and that was sort of the time when the change of government happened. There was in India there was a new kind of engagement through the neighborhood first policy, and he sort of was instrumental in that as well. But before that, early years of his career, he was staff officer to one of the legendary foreign secretaries in Indian Foreign Service, Mr. S.K. Singh. Then he was director in External Affairs Minister Jaswant Singh's office from 1998 to 2000. And he was press secretary to the president in 1995 to 1997. I think he was when President Shankar Dayal Sharma and President K.R. Narayanan two presidents. He was spokesperson, he was press secretary to two presidents. So you can see the breadth of his experience and knowledge. And to cap it all, after he retired, after some coaxing and cajoling by friends, he wrote this book called Kathmandu Dilemma. And I would recommend people who are watching this to read this book, because it is really the most updated version of India Nepal ties, written by an expert, a former Indian diplomat. With that, I think I would begin the conversation. And we saw uh, uh, unprecedented scenes earlier this month, Ambassador Ray, when we saw these protests by Gen Z leaders and students in the streets of Nepal, which led to unprecedented scenes of politicians being hounded, being chased, being beaten up, parliament building being burned, offices and homes of leaders, ministers being attacked and vandalized and burnt, and which all of that led to the collapse of the KP Sharma Oli government in Kathmandu, and that led to the formation of a unique arrangement, which is the interim government of Nepal, now led by former Chief Justice Shushila Karki. Now, ever since that, there has been a sort of lot of internal movements. The political process, we have seen Nepal president announcing elections next year. So, to understand this entire lay of land, I want to I want to ask Ambassador Ray by giving us a sense of the political landscape in which Nepal was functioning in 2025. If you could give us a sense of the political landscape, Ambassador Ray.
Well, 2015 was a landmark year. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your generous introduction. 2015 in Nepal was a landmark year. A new constitution was adopted. And this was a constitution drafted by an elected constituent assembly. And it was a negotiated settlement between diverse interest groups against the backdrop of the violent Maoist insurgency, which cost many thousands of lives, and the Madhesi Andolans. So, this constitution was expected to deliver peace, stability, prosperity, employment. It was expected to create a new Nepal. And while the constitution is a very significant landmark in the political evolution of Nepal, I think the peace and prosperity dividend has been inadequate to meet the aspirations of the people. And the other thing is that it seems that a few leaders have really distributed power and resources amongst themselves and their cadres and their own people. So the benefits that were expected from this new constitution in terms of economic progress, in terms of employment, never really appeared. On the contrary, what happened is you had the same set of elderly leaders rotating in the position of prime minister. It's the same faces that, for instance, I started dealing with Nepal in 2002. And these are exactly the people that we were dealing with at that time, and they continue even now. And Nepal is a very young country. So you had this musical chairs between leaders, one. That in itself is, reflects the political processes. But what was problematic was the levels of corruption. There were huge amounts of corruption, and there was a very pervasive feeling that these leaders are basically there for themselves. And, not much is happening for the younger generation. And, almost over 1,500 or 1,500 people, young people from Nepal, leave the country every day looking for jobs abroad, in India, in the Gulf, in Malaysia, in other countries. So, this corruption, lack of employment opportunities, development, and the sort of hubris attached to the last government, and the arrogance displayed by the leader, especially in terms of banning the social media apps. And social media apps are a part of the lives of everyone today, and they're part of the livelihoods. They contribute to the livelihoods of people. So this was a very arrogant step, and I think this whole thing should have been handled better. So the first day of the protest, of course, was peaceful, and young people were on the streets. But it's after the killing of 19 youngsters by the security forces that all hell broke loose. And the second day you saw this fury unleashed on the streets of Nepal. You referred to the manhandling of leaders, the burning down of their houses, the burning down of all the institutions of democracy, the Supreme Court, the Parliament, the Prime Minister's office. So complete mayhem. And my sense is that the first day was the Gen Z protest, and the second day, other elements also infiltrated into this protest and took advantage of the situation. And, all this could have been handled better by the government, and perhaps this whole, really tragic episode could have been prevented through better handling. So, that's the state of affairs in Nepal as of the 9th of September.
Right. Thank you so much for giving us a sort of a broad understanding of the lay of the land. Now I'll unpack some of the issues. Firstly, this Nepal is a sort of a young country. It has a large young population, but there are not enough jobs. Unemployment rate is quite high, and if my understanding is correct, lot of young people leave the country for overseas for employment, and that has been a big sort of a challenge for the country and the governments to keep the talent or keep the young generation, and that would have led to a certain sense of disillusionment amongst the younger population. In If you could just take us through that process, because you've dealt with this and you've lived there, Ambassador.
No, absolutely. Because, there are no jobs available in the country. There's very little domestic investment. There's very little foreign direct investment in Nepal. Whatever money comes in, the utilization rate is very low. The utilization of even government resources is quite low. And there's this endemic corruption. So, economic development has not progressed at the pace that was required. And, what has happened on the 8th and 9th is not completely unexpected or surprising. Many months ago, I was in Nepal. This is after the Bangladesh uprising. And a lot of people, including newspaper editors, were asking me, do you think a Bangladesh type situation could happen in Nepal? So the signs were there, and the political leadership was in denial. And the other aspect I want to mention is, the government of Nepal at the time was a very strange creature. It was a combination of the two largest parties in parliament. So effectively, they controlled parliament, and there was virtually no opposition. So there was no possibility of any opposition within parliament. And that's why, the opposition to the government took place either on social media or on the streets. And of course, we know this phenomenon of Nepo kids and so on, flashy lifestyles on Instagram. So all this led to a lot of anger. So, it's basically misgovernance or, lack of good governance and this arrogance and hubris and corruption that has really caused this fury and unleashed this, colossal damage on the state of Nepal.
So you talked about this nepotism in Nepal, and we saw these pictures of Nepo kids, as they're called, basically children of politicians, ministers, who have an extravagant lifestyle and were putting it out on the social media feed, say Instagram or TikTok, and that jarred in the minds of ordinary Nepalese citizens. You know, is was this the last straw, and has this been building up in your interaction? Did you see this phenomenon develop when you spoke to ministers or met the families or met people in Nepal?
So the phenomenon, the anger at the corruption was certainly building up. One, two, Nepal has this peculiar system. It's like a spoiled system. So if you're in power, virtually all jobs, including in universities and virtually everywhere, are distributed amongst your cadres. So it was a very peculiar sort of system. It's certainly not merit based. Even in the bureaucracy, it was known that so and so is affiliated to such and such party. So this is the sort of bargaining, and this is the sort of compact between political parties that had been entered into in Nepal. And so those who didn't belong to this particular sort of framework or group were completely left out. And secondly, as you said, it's a young country, and a lot of Nepalese are working abroad. And they live in foreign countries. They see the development, the opportunities, and they raise this question: why is this not happening in our own country? What's wrong that we are not developing, whereas other countries, where they're working, are developing well? And you could see the signs of this in terms even of the last elections that were held some, many months, more than a year ago. In those elections, relatively unknown new forces came up in Nepal. So the established political parties were already being discredited. So this process has built up over a period of time. It's not something instantaneous. The banning of the social media apps was, the proverbial last straw on the camel's back that unleashed this fury. But, the signs, have been there for those who want to see them.
I wanted to understand from you that, in the political landscape of Nepal, is there a sort of a tension, rivalry between hills and the plains? And is that also a factor? Did that also play out in this particular time?
Historically, there has been a big rivalry. Well, not a rivalry, really. There's been a feeling that the people of the plains, the Madhesis, are discriminated against in terms of representation in state institutions, in bureaucracy, in the security forces. And so there were these big andolans in 2007 and 2008, which led to a certain understanding between the government and the plains people. And, this was supposed to be incorporated into the 2015 constitution. To some extent it was, but, obviously everything that was agreed was not accommodated. So that has been the historical narrative in Nepal. But I don't see that playing out in this, agitations of the 8th and 9th September. In fact, you had similar incidents and events across the country, including in the big towns of the Tarai. So I would say this has been really an urban-centric, urban-focused movement throughout the country. And there is no separation in terms of the hills and the plains, at least insofar as this movement is concerned.
You talked about the few, this was leaders had captured the political space. If you could take us through the old guard and the new characters, new guard that came up in the last election, if you could just talk us through that.
Historically, the main parties in Nepal have been the Nepali Congress and the Communist Party of Nepal, UML. And these parties have really struggled and fought for political emancipation. They fought against the autocratic monarchy, the partyless panchayat system. So the contributions these parties have made to the Nepal of today is very significant. And the leaders of these parties, some of them, including former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, spent many, many years in the king's jail. So, their sacrifices and contributions have been enormous. But what has happened is that, after the multi-party democracy was institutionalized in Nepal, a few of these senior leaders have continued to remain in power for a very long period of time. And they control their parties like fiefdoms. And it's become very difficult for new forces and new people to emerge from within these parties. And even now,
So we are pointing at Mr. Deoba, Mr. Oli, Mr. Prachanda.
that's right. And Mr. Prachanda's contribution, of course, was not so much on the political side as it was on the politics of identity and inclusion, bringing in federalism into Nepal, bringing in some sort of affirmative action into Nepal for those that were discriminated against. So each of these parties has contributed very significantly to the Nepal of today. But the problem has been that, some of these leaders have just been there for far too long. And the second generation of leadership has not, not been allowed to emerge. And you see that even today, after these incidents of the 8th and 9th of September, except for Mr. Baburam Bhattarai, former Prime Minister, who belongs to a small party, who has resigned, none of the other leaders of these three big parties have resigned. So what are the newer forces that came up in the last elections? One was the Rashtriya Swatantra Party. A lot of, it was led by a very charismatic TV anchor like you. This guy was able to get 20 seats in the last parliament, and he's collected very bright, young, educated people in his party. But unfortunately, there were a lot of allegations of corruption against him, and he's been sitting in jail. And one of the things that happened, for instance, on the 9th of September was that, some cadres, possibly from his party, went and forcibly released him from jail, as a result of which some 13,000 prisoners escaped from jails all over Nepal. And that has played out very, very badly for Mr. Ravi Lamichhane. That's his name. He leads this RSP. The other charismatic leader is the mayor of Kathmandu. He's a bit of an unknown quantity. He's an engineer. He studied I think in Karnataka. He's also a rapper. And he's emerged as, the sort of very popular leader, especially with Gen Z. And, he was the person they had wanted to make prime minister of this interim government. And, he threw his weight behind the former Chief Justice, Mrs. Sushila Karki. He has emerged. Similarly, in another part of Nepal, another independent mayor has won. So all these are pointers that the people are unhappy with the traditional political parties. Or, I want to correction. People are unhappy with the leaders of the traditional political parties who continue to remain. And the problem is that, if nothing changes in these parties, then, people might start feeling that, these parties themselves are the problem. So I think, Nepal is at a very delicate time right now in terms of how the future is going to unfold. Right. If there is reorganization, changes, if the leaders, the political leaders of Nepal, draw the right lessons from these movements, I think things could improve very significantly. If not, then who knows, how the situation will unfold.
Right. We'll come to that. Just wanted to tell our viewers that this Baburam Bhattarai is a former prime minister. He was with and he fought against the monarchy. He was part of the Maoist movement with Mr. Prachanda, and later he left that party and has formed a new, smaller outfit. The other, new cast of characters are these smaller leaders who started the Gen Z protesters, like these names we have heard of, Sudhan Gurung and Tanuja Pandey. Do they have a recall value politically now, or do they have a future?
Well, I think Sudhan Gurung has said that they're going to set up a Gen Z party. So presumably they will participate in the next elections. I don't know what the mayor of Kathmandu is planning to do, whether he is planning to get into active politics. He is in active politics, at the national level. So I think you will see some significant new developments in the future. And, the Gen Z has been a kind of an amorphous group. There are many, many, many groups. And, there are several leaders. You've mentioned one or two. There is Purushottam Yadav from the Tarai. There are other leaders. So I think, this lot of people who brought about these tremendous changes in Nepal are going to sit together, to discuss and decide the way forward in terms of their own political participation in elections.
Right. So we come to 8th and 9th of September when the protests happened over the social media ban, which you rightly pointed out was the last nail in the coffin. Then there was police firing by the Nepalese police forces. What did How did that happen? And does that signal kind of a complete disconnect with the people of Nepal? And did that also showcase a complete apathy towards the people, towards the electorate?
Well, the disconnect was certainly there, because even after these big protests and the killings of 19 students on the 8th of September, Prime Minister Oli did not resign. He resigned only the next day in the afternoon. So there was certainly a disconnect. Why these killings happened is a mystery to me. What I am told is that, some of these youngsters were clambering over the barricades and trying to enter into parliament. And that's when, the head of the Kathmandu administration gave the authority to the armed police to fire. And, these students were unarmed. They were not armed students. So this was a disastrous decision. And, this really contributed to the mayhem the next day. So as I was saying earlier, had the situation been handled better, had there been some discussions with the Gen Z, initially the protest started off very peacefully. They were singing and marching and, there was none of this. It's only after the killings that, things took such a dangerous turn.
Another question that comes to my mind, from sitting from Delhi, why didn't the army come out early enough to sort of douse the fire and calm the nerves of people?
So that is a very valid question. And, that is a question that I've been grappling with too. Because, many of these buildings are high security areas, the parliament, the president's office, the seat of the government, Singha Darbar. So why is it that the army didn't come out? And in their system, I presume there is some system whereby the army is called by the civilian authority of the day. So I don't know those technicalities, but this is a question that is being asked in terms of, had the army come in earlier, could some of this have been stopped? The second question in my mind is that, bringing down these massive buildings, some of them are of great historical value, these Rana palaces. It's not something that some students can go and burn a building and the whole thing is engulfed in flames and completely destroyed. So obviously the next days, this protest was infiltrated into by certain groups and certain people. We don't know who they are, but I'm sure the inquiries will happen in Nepal. So obviously it was infiltrated. And there was a lot of looting, supermarkets, for instance, were burned. There was also looting. Newspaper offices were burnt down. So there was a lot of mayhem. And the army, came in only several hours later after the prime minister had resigned. And it's only in the night of the 9th of September that the army took charge. And after that, once the government was formed, then things started going back to normal. And actually, it's very strange because, just 2 days later, things in Kathmandu seem to be back to normal. Of course, you have all these burnt edifices and archives. A lot of the archives have also been burnt. But, life has begun as normal again.
Yeah, since you mentioned burning down of buildings, and one of the newspaper, the major newspaper media houses offices was also burned down, and the Kathmandu Post couldn't bring out its physical edition for a few days. I mean, they could only upload their PDF on their social media channels. That's how they kind of stayed relevant. Their website was down for a few days, and I was talking to journalists in that organization, and they were saying they were working under a lot of tough, trying circumstances at that point of time. Why targeting the media at that point of time, Ambassador?
One can only speculate. But you mentioned the one media house. There was another media house that was also burnt down. And people speculate that so and so was close to such and such party, or had problems with such and such. And so some people took advantage of the situation and did that. Burnt these buildings down. The same thing with the supermarkets. Why on earth burn down the supermarkets? So similar thing that, there was this connections with certain political,
Also,
parties.
the Hilton Hotel.
The Hilton Hotel, yeah, there were very strong rumors earlier that, the son of one of the major leaders of Nepal had big stake in that. But this is all in the realm of, speculation. So there's no, unless there's a detailed inquiry into all this, it's very difficult to say who did it and, why did it.
Right. Now we come to the new interim government that is then formed. And, it is led by former Chief Justice Shushila Karki. What are your thoughts? What are your impressions of the early days of this interim government? Because I believe the constitution doesn't have any provision of an interim government in Nepal. And if you've interacted with her or if you've known about her, if you could share your perception about her.
Well, she was the Chief Justice of Nepal when I was ambassador, and I've had the privilege of meeting her on a couple of occasions. She is a lawyer. She has upheld the constitution throughout her life, and she has a very high integrity, and she's respected in Nepal for that. So I feel very confident that, with her at the realm, even though her own appointment is something that is not allowed,
Constitutional.
is not allowed under the constitution. Well, the president has appointed her under certain provisions where, which say that he is doing this because he upholds the constitution, and using the so-called doctrine of necessity. But, I just want to tell your viewers that a similar thing happened in 2013 when the parliament had been dissolved, and an interim prime minister, the sitting Chief Justice of Nepal, Mr. Khilraj Regmi, was sworn in as the prime minister. And his principal task was to organize the elections to the Constituent Assembly. And I think, that is the principal task of this government as defined by the government itself, is to organize the elections by the 5th of March. And Prime Minister Sushila Karki has said herself that she does not want to stay in this chair for even a day longer. So that is the big challenge. And secondly, of course, when this government was formed, I think the Gen Z and Mrs. Karki and others insisted that Parliament be dissolved. And this was a big bone of contention with the political parties. And the political parties were not in favor of Parliament being dissolved. And they felt that you could keep it in, some sort of suspended animation in case there are problems in the future. At least you have a representative body. But this was something not acceptable to the Gen Z. So Parliament has been dissolved. And, we hope very much that elections will be held by the due date. Otherwise there will be another kind of constitutional vacuum staring Nepal in the face, and they will have to figure out how to overcome that.
Right. When you were describing this particular situation, it reminded me of Bangladesh, where I had the opportunity to go after Sheikh Hasina government collapsed, and similarly, an interim government was formed after the student protesters proposed Professor Muhammad Yunus's name. If I would like you to zoom out a bit and tell us how similar or how different is Nepal from the Bangladesh experiment? Also, similar situation happened in terms of in Sri Lanka as well a couple of years back. So, looking a bit outside, zooming out, and a sort of 35,000 feet bird's eye view, if you could give us that.
Well, what I would say is, all these are very young countries with youthful populations that have aspirations. The leadership in most of these countries is relatively old. And I sense there is a big disconnect between the leadership and what is happening at the grassroots level. So I don't think the leaders are fully cognizant of what the youth of their societies want. One. Two, I think people underestimate the mobilization power of social media. So, this is something, of course, governments can use, but ordinary citizens can use. And you see the manner in which this has been used to mobilize the people. And in a country like Nepal, where the social media apps were banned and only two or three existed, using those existing apps to get people onto the streets. Three, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, the leader of the country had to flee, and she had to go into exile. In Nepal, that is not the case. Even when the king was removed, he did not go into exile. So it's a slightly different situation, and these leaders in Nepal still continue to hold very important positions in their political parties, and they're major stakeholders in what's going to happen in Nepal in the future. So it's not the same thing. But, I would say that the younger generation is watching very keenly what's happening in Sri Lanka, what's happening in Bangladesh, what's happening in Indonesia. In Nepal, the Gen Z protesters were carrying the same flag, this manga comic flag of Japan about, with the skulls and so on, that was seen in Indonesia. So it's really an interconnected world. And obviously, there are influences that permeate borders. And you see that everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. We also saw similar in South Korea last year, So I want to sort of, since you mentioned the king, and do you think? I mean, there is sort of pro-royalist elements in in Nepal's polity, and one of the parties obviously also is seen as pro-monarchy. So you think sort of pro-monarchy voices are getting stronger, and is there a possibility of monarchy coming back?
Well, on the first point, because of the anger with the established political parties and the fact that the young people have no personal experience of the repression of the monarchy, which effectively ended in 2006, formally it ended in 2008, there has been some increase and in the support for the monarchy, especially amongst young people. And we saw this in some rallies that were held several months ago in Nepal. But if you go by the last election, when the Royalist Party secured a mere 5% of the vote, and I think 12 or 13 seats in parliament, it was better than what they had secured last time round, but still not significant enough, to make a very sort of major difference in Nepal. And there were attempts, there even within Gen Z, there may be elements that support a revival of the monarchy. But by and large, I think the majority are very clear that Republican Nepal is what they want. And they want improvements to the Republic as has been established in the 2015 Constitution. They don't want to do away with the Republic, but they want to have improvements in the constitution. They want certain amendments. Political stability is a big issue. They're talking about a directly elected executive head of government. So there are a lot of issues, and obviously over the months ahead, we will see how discussions take place. But right now, I think the immediate task is really for the elections to be organized by this government. And if I may just add one more point here, you see, it's important also to understand that the political parties are important stakeholders in this process. You can't have elections if the political parties are not on board. So I personally feel that the interim government must take some measure, to enter into some discussion with political parties, because they are the stakeholders. And, it's very important that the interim government and parties kind of work together, even though there are these issues, that have resulted in the overthrow of KP Sharma Oli's government. But the political parties are still stakeholders, with or without the leaders that are disliked by Gen Z. So in order to have successful elections, you have to do all the nitty-gritty and the logistics. But clearly, you must have all the political forces participate in them.
Right. So in the traditional political parties, what happens there? Do you think the old guard will be eased out now, and the younger generation of leaders in these traditional political parties will get an opportunity now that the older guard has been sort of facing a challenge?
Well, I hope so very much, but I'm not so optimistic, because the old guard is really, kind of reining in and refusing to let go. And, despite all that has happened, some of the leadership seems to be in denial that, they were not part of the problem. So if within every party, there are elements that want a change. There are younger leaders who want to be given a chance. But it's going to be a process. And so far, except for former Prime Minister Baburam Bhattarai, who has resigned, I don't see any sign of any of the other leaders, either Prachanda or Oli or Sher Bahadur Deuba handing over so far.
So we also saw these images of Hilton Hotel being burned, being set on fire, and other shopping centers. You said, So I want to get a sense from you. How does that impact Nepal's economy? Because something like this scares away foreign investors or private investors, private companies who want to invest in Nepal. What does it mean for Nepal's economy?
Absolutely. It's devastating for the Nepalese economy. They're talking about the damages worth 3 trillion rupees in Nepal. And this is government property. This is not including private property, private houses, hotels, supermarkets that have been vandalized. It will take a long time for Nepal to get back this infrastructure, which has been so badly damaged. And I think foreign countries, including India, will have to play a very significant role. And we've already offered, full support to the government and assistance as required by the government. Foreign investment, as it is, was shy of Nepal because of the political instability. And now, obviously, it will be impacted negatively. But one silver lining is the hydropower projects that are being undertaken. And, these are big ticket projects, billion-dollar projects. And these projects are proceeding apace. So hopefully, this will contribute very significantly to the earnings. The new government has very eminent people in the government, and they have brought in some very strong austerity measures as well in terms of curbing government expenditure. And I'm sure they will have to work out some schemes for rebuilding and for getting investment, including from India. But that is not something that's going to happen immediately. I think the political issues really need to be sorted out and the elections organized. This is medium-term plans.
One chatter that was very much on social media, especially, was involvement of a foreign hand, an external interference in this thing. Some call it deep state, some call it foreign hand. So, what is your sense on that?
My sense is that this was largely a homegrown agitation. It wasn't as if somebody outside the country was controlling the levers and organizing this whole thing throughout Nepal. Uh, I don't think anyone has that kind of outreach. Number one. Number two, after the killings of the 19 students, the next day, I think there was infiltration by from various vested groups within Nepal itself, and that's why the agitation took such a dangerous turn. So I don't think there was a foreign hand, foreign influence. Certainly, the developments in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia have created much more awareness, have created much more confidence in their own power within the Gen
So, there's a
Z.
sense of agency amongst younger people.
Absolutely. So that obviously influences, their thinking and the manner in which they proceed. So that, yes. But, in Nepal, there's been a lot of chatter. India, there's been a lot of chatter about this foreign hand. And people are saying that this is an NGO government. Many of the ministers have come from something called the Barbara Adams Foundation. This was an American lady who lived in Nepal for 40 years, who was close to one of the princes. And she bequeathed her property, for this NGO to be established. And it has very eminent people in it. And they raise resources domestically. So, this kind of loose talk is going on quite a bit. And, I suspect it is from, expected sources that want to discredit the present government and what it's doing. I know many of the leaders of this government, and I can say that they are all people of very high qualifications and very well known and recognized in Nepal.
Right. Before I move to the Q&A, I want to ask you, what is the India impact of these developments in Nepal?
So Nepal is a very critical relationship for India. We have open borders. We have very close people-to-people relationships. So anything that happens in Nepal obviously is of great relevance to India. And I must say that we have responded very swiftly. Our Prime Minister spoke to Prime Minister Sushila Karki, congratulated her, and said we will extend full support to the government. When he went to Manipur, he again spoke about how of supporting Mrs. Karki as a symbol of women's empowerment as well, of supporting everybody who has upheld democratic values. He even spoke about the Gen Z cleaning up the streets. And I know from my sources in Nepal that some of the Gen Z people were really, very happy that this is something that was mentioned by our Prime Minister. So I think we are committed. Our ambassador has met the new leadership. So we are committed to working with this government, and I am sure that we will extend, whatever support is required. Because for India, I think peace and stability in Nepal is critical for our own peace and stability. And so, we must, and as we have said, we will work with this government, in the days and months ahead.
Right. I'll move to the question and answer. And the first question is from Mr. Deepak Bahal. Mr. Bahal, if you could unmute yourself and ask a question. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Deepak Bahal. I think he's not there, so we could move to the next question from Jayant Karandikar. Mr. Jayant Karandikar, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question.
Can you hear now? Hello.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
yes,
audible.
please go ahead.
Um, Why this turmoil was not uh, attended in previous days? Why why this allowed to be exploded like this in a small country like Nepal?
I think essentially, Mr. Karandikar wants to ask that why did it go unnoticed and and blew up in a country like Nepal?
No, absolutely. No, this is a question that everyone is asking. I mean, why is it that the security establishment of Nepal not take preventive action sooner rather than later? There was a delay of several hours, and this is a valid question. But I'm afraid I don't have any specific answer to this.
I want to go to the chat box, Ambassador. There are some good questions, and one question is specifically interesting that Mr. Pranav Sharan Srivastava asks: given the fact that Kathmandu's been a hotbed for espionage agencies and China's huge investment in the country, to what extent these agencies were responsible for this mayhem? And which bloc would benefit from the new regime at Nepal? It's a very loaded question, but I hope you get the drift of the question.
No, I do. You see, what has happened is with this Andolan, many of the Communist parties stand quite discredited, or at least their leadership is discredited. And these are the two Communist parties. One is the party of the Maoists, and the other is the United Marxist Leninists. And China's entire strategy over the last few years has been to unite all the leftist forces in Nepal. They succeeded temporarily, then the United Party broke again. So I don't think this outcome that you see in Nepal today is of great benefit to the Chinese. And as I said, to me this seems like more of a homegrown agitation because of the problems within Nepal itself. And I don't think there's a foreign hand, as I've said earlier. And obviously this will have, I think all countries are now reaching out to the Sushila Karki government. But having said that, obviously the role of China will continue there. There's no doubt about it. They will continue to strengthen their presence through BRI programs and other initiatives, as will India. India has a lot of connectivity projects, a lot of hydropower projects. So this kind of situation will continue, and we will have to manage it as best as we can.
Just Sanjay Bhagat asks a question quite related to this only, but in the last few years, a clear political leaning had emerged towards China in Nepal's political landscape. Do you see any significant change happening in this approach in the new political setup? And here, I mean, let me add, I mean, the Oli government especially was seen as pro-China in sort of by India. You think there will be a course correction in the Communist Party, or you think the Chinese influence will stay?
Well, I hope very much so, because, for Nepal also, India is a very critical relationship, as Nepal is for India. And certainly, some of the actions taken by the Oli government, including the boundary issue, fact that he raised it in China recently during the SCO meeting, a lot of the agreements that have been signed with the Chinese happened during Prime Minister Oli's prime ministership. So there has been a sense that, perhaps this government was not as well disposed to us or better disposed to the Chinese. But, as I say, for both our countries, for India and Nepal, our bilateral relationship is very, very critical. And every effort will be made, I'm sure, by the new authorities. Of course, this is an interim government, so they're grappling very much with their own problems. But I'm sure after the elections, any dispensation that emerges will work hard to strengthen the very cordial, very strong relationship between our two countries.
Before I call for the next questioner, there's another question from Kelkar. He asks, did the transition between royalty to democracy come too quickly for Nepal, for which the country was not really prepared?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, this is,
It's a
they
what
have,
if question.
yeah, because you see, the uh, people of Nepal have been struggling for multi-party democracy after it was abolished in 1960 by the then king Mahendra. So they had multi-party democracy for a few years, and then you had this non-party rule of a panchayat, direct rule by the king for 30 years. And political leaders of Nepal, many of them were in exile in India. So the struggle continued. The struggle has been going on for 5, 6 decades. So I think the people of Nepal very much want multi-party democracy. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And they have seen the monarchs rule, and it is after all this that they decided that Nepal is going to be a republic. So I don't think it is for anybody to say has it come too early or not. I mean, people could say that of so many countries, but this has been a cherished desire of the Nepali people, and they have struggled and fought and sacrificed to achieve multi-party democracy. So this is one of the really cherished achievements of the people of Nepal, including Gen Z.
Right, right. I'll call out for the next questioner, Mr. Rakshit Kotnala. Mr. Rakshit Kotnala, if you could unmute yourself and ask a question.
Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
So my question was regarding the Nepali army that we have seen that in the it has a very good relation with the United States Army through the US command that is in the Pacific, that look after the Pacific command. My question is that does US played any role here? Like we have seen in the Bangladesh that the Bangladeshi army confronted the protester, but after the 2 or 3 days they were become totally null and totally their role become totally role totally vanished. So my question is like the Nepali army is working with the close relationship with US, like in the war colleges, like general staff trainings and like international military education trainings. So does it have do you feel like that US played any role here, especially when the US is always near Myanmar? There is playing a role in Myanmar also. That thank you, sir.
So let me say this, the Indian and the Nepalese army have a very, very strong relationship. And, the chiefs of our respective army are honorary generals of the other army. So this is a unique relationship nowhere else in the world. But just like the Indian army also has strong relationships with the American army and other armies, the Nepalese army also has links with the American army. And, they have training programs and exchanges, and they have humanitarian exercises, etc. So obviously there is a connection between Nepal's army with the US, just like India's army also has with the US. Specifically, if the US army played any role, I'm not aware, but I am aware that I think there were, and this is through Nepalese sources, that the Indian and the Nepalese army were in touch with each other during these this whole process of agitation that we saw on the 8th and 9th of September.
Right. I want to ask you, Ambassador, because you've observed Nepal for such a long time, this particular incident, does it sort of, does it have a future that the Gen Z protesters can form a party and sort of come to power? Do you see that possibility happening?
Yeah, so this is the tough issue. You see, having this agitation and mobilizing people and overthrowing the government has been achieved. but the difficult task lies ahead. How do you bring this amorphous group together? Who will control the reins of this movement? Some people have been identified. There is talk that they want to establish a political party, but it's easier said than done, and they don't have too much time before the elections. So this is a tall task, and let's see how the situation develops. But my sense is that the Gen Z would like to consolidate the gains of their movement in terms of forming political party, one political party, two political parties, all that I think is up in the air. But initial steps seem to be in that direction.
My last question before I ask Manas to close is, I have two questions, and if you were to advise two people, one advice each, one to the head of the interim government, former Chief Justice Sushila Karki, one thing that she should do to address the situation, that is one. And second is, if you were to advise the Indian government, the foreign secretary or the external affairs minister, what would your advice be? What should India do or not do?
Well, for India, I think, we have extended full support, and we will provide assistance for the elections, which is the single most important task before the Prime Minister of Nepal. So I don't think there's any more advice. I think India has handled the situation quite well. This time, there are no allegations of an Indian hand, for instance. You don't hear much, although I think former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and one of their former deputy prime ministers have hinted at an Indian hand, but I don't think anybody buys that. So that's a big plus. But for Prime Minister Sushila Karki, my only point is that there should be some mechanism for consultation with all the stakeholders in the electoral process. And in this, I include both Gen Z and the established political parties, because you will have successful elections if everybody participates in these together. So I think everybody has to be taken on board, and it's important to have this consultative process underway sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ranjit Rae, for this insightful conversation. It was a fantastic masterclass in about Nepal's political situation, as well as, the kind of how should we look at it sitting here in New Delhi. Thank you so much for this session, and I'll hand it over to Manas, my colleague Manas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhajit. Thank you, Ranjit Rai, sir. Absolutely, that was a masterclass, the right word you used, Shubhajit. And while this discussion was going on, this engaging discussion was going on, I was looking at the questions which were coming. I'm sure Shubhajit was also looking at it. A lot of questions were answered while the discussion was taking place. And then, of course, we can't take a lot of questions because of the constraint of time. But as Shubhajit said, this masterclass where everything was explained, and that is what we do in Explained Live, from the past, future, present, everything, causes, consequences, and of course, the valuable insights which our expert brought it on the table today. Now, in the next Explained Live, we'll discuss something which is making headlines, which needs an expert input and expert analysis. So thank you, all the viewers. See you again.